Hello, wherever you are in the world today. Welcome to Beyond the Art and our series, The Stories That Carry Us. I'm your host, Craig Beaumont Flynn, a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and the Delaware Tribe of Indians. In each episode, we will discuss with various Native American artists, influencers, art leaders, and everyone in between their experiences, the communities they serve, and the translation and interpretation of the Native American art world today. Welcome to Beyond the Art today. We have Preston Singletary, a Tlingkit tribal member. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Preston, how are you?
Oh, I'm pretty good. Thank you for having me.
Well, welcome to the show. Why don't you go ahead and start and tell and share a bit about your personal background and cultural heritage.
So, yeah, I'm a Tlingkit tribal member, Kagwantan killer whale from the Eagle Moiety. My great-grandmother was raised in Sitka, Alaska, but then she moved to Seattle in the 20s and brought her whole family, including my grandmother. She was widowed, and then she so relocated to the Seattle area. I basically grew up as urban native in Seattle, where I continue to live and work here. I basically kind of fell into glassblowing in around 1982 through introduction of a good friend of mine who I went to high school with, Dante Marioni, and his father was one of the early sort of hippie pioneers of the studio glass movement, which grew quite prominently here in the Northwest and Seattle area, largely due to Dale Chihuly and the Pilchuck Glass School. And so I started as a production glass blower. I went to Pilchuck Glass School, international meeting place, and that's where I was exposed to other artists from around the world who came to teach workshops and have residencies and things. So I basically learned through practical experience. I started to learn different techniques of glass making, primarily glass blowing, but then I decided at one point to sort of, in an effort to make my work more unique, I guess, I turned to my cultural background. So that was in about 1988, a few years after I started blowing glass, and I was kind of dabbling in that in various ways, and also playing music. That's another big part of my artistic expression. I have a band that kind of explores Native culture through music, and more of a jazz, rock, and funk style group. We call ourselves Kuik, which means potlatch. It means potlatch in the Tlingkit language. So, so I kind of, I moonlight as a musician. I make glass during the day, and make some of the sculptures you can see on the shelf behind me.
So how has your Native American identity influenced your artistic work?
Well, yeah, I mean, I grew up, my great grandmother lived to be 100 years old, and, we spent time with her, a pretty big family with lots of cousins and aunties and so forth. And so, I always was aware of it, but of course I grew up outside of the traditional territory where the Tlingit people are in Southeast Alaska, and so I just kind of endeavored to do this and tried to figure out how the design work and all of these. So I had to kind of train myself in the tribal style, which I learned through books, and then later on working with different scholars and artists, and getting input on how I could build this, or how I could develop this on a deeper level.
Could you discuss your artistic process?
So, so the process that I use is working with hot glass. And so that is glass blowing kind of process. It involves working with molten glass, taking out of the furnace, applying colors, and making. In my case, I make a lot of sculpture, so I work out of the round a
Hmm.
lot. So I work with these hot torches and allows me to superheat certain areas, and I can manipulate them and cut and pull and stretch and create sculpture that is inspired by my cultural background.
So is
And
there?
oh
Go
yeah,
ahead.
I guess that the other component of that is that it's kind of a multi-stage process. So I'll
Right.
blow a form, or I'll sculpt a form, and then I put a rubber tape on the surface of the glass after it's cooled, and then
Hmm.
I'll draw directly onto the form, cut out the areas that create the designs, and then I'll sandblast through layers of color typically. So as you can see behind my head here, there's a red and black piece. So that
Hmm.
at one point that piece was all black, and so I put the design work on there, with drawing, and then cut out, exposing those areas, and then carving away the black layer to expose the color underneath. So that's kind of a simplified explanation of what I do. And you can see there's a lot of variety of ways that I can work, and uh, mostly freehand sculpting. In some cases, I'll blow into a form to get a general shape, and then in the case of like a mask or something, I can blow that into the form, and then I can carve different designs into into the shape itself.
Now, how do you choose your subject matters? Do you have a specific idea beforehand that you kind of sketch out before you start creating, or do you just start
Yeah.
creating and it comes to you?
Well, at first I started working, trying to mimic types of forms that were
Mm.
traditional, like a bowl or a hat or some sort of a sculpture or like an amulet shape that was typically maybe a small piece made out of bone,
Right, right.
and but then I'll make it in a larger, more sculptural form. And so in some cases, like I said, I'm trying to mimic certain cultural objects, and then in some cases I get more abstract and kind of allow modernism to sort of come into the work. I didn't go to art school, so I spent a lot of time looking at other types of art and was really fascinated with what the modernists were doing, and come to realize that they had a big appreciation of what African art, Native American art,
Hmm.
oceanic art, and sort of getting inspiration from those cultures. And so I started to analyze that, and kind of turning the tables on the modernists a little bit, kind of using making maybe a spare organic form that, but then I'll put Northwest Coast designs on it.
So, is there a specific message or narrative you're trying to or hope to convey in your pieces to the audience and collector?
Yeah, I mean, I put a pretty major exhibit together called Raven in the Box of Daylight. So I was kind of analyzing an ancient mythology, a story that's been passed down through, hundreds of years or maybe thousands of
Mm.
years, about how Raven stole the sun and he placed it in the sky. And so I made about 60 pieces of glass, and created like an immersive experience. So, you
Mm.
walk in, the world's in darkness, and then, this white raven, he's kind of trying to find out, how to get a hold of the daylight, which he learns from these fishermen of the night, that this old man has these objects in his clan house. So he eventually gets into the clan house. He one by one he takes the stars and then the moon and the sun. And he places it in the sky, and that's how daylight came to the world. So um, it's a rather long story, depending on the details that you put into it, but
Right.
it's a very traditional story. And I enhanced it with kind of video backdrops, and uh, so I created a soundscape, and kind of I layered in Tlingkit language, telling stories about Raven. So, I mean, unless you understood Tlingkit language, you wouldn't
Right.
know what was going on. But I was trying to create this atmosphere and place the viewer in this kind of an immersive experience. So in some cases, I'm trying to bring awareness to the culture and the
Hmm.
stories and the symbolism. And so there, I worked with this elder from Yakutat, Alaska, and he considered himself a mythologist. He took the Tlingit language, or the Tlingit stories, and he kind of made points in how they relate to other mythologies and theologies,
Right.
and so he kind of unlocked the symbolism behind all of these stories, or several stories. And so he encouraged me to take his work and be inspired by it. So sometimes I'll create, I think every object that I make has some kind of relationship to an old symbol, which I make anew in this material of glass. And so, in some cases, I'll make these totem poles, and in that case, I do what it's a lost wax casting.
Hmm.
It's akin to bronze casting. So we're working from a wooden form. I work with a carver who will carve a totem form in the traditional way with tools and adds, the hook knives and what have you. And then I'll take that form and then I'll make a wax version of it. You cast plaster around the wax, you melt the wax out, and you have this negative space, and then you load that negative space with glass, and then you melt it into the form. When you break the plaster away, then the result is sort of like a totem, a traditional totem form. And so um, then there's a lot of work that goes into grinding the surfaces back and make sure that all the details in there, and it's quite a process, but time consuming process.
Have you tested your abilities in other mediums? Are you?
Yeah, I did dabble in wood carving a little bit, but then I realized that, my skills as a glass blower are, far exceed my wood carving skills.
Right.
And so I work traditionally with carvers, and I'll draw the design out. They'll carve it for me, so they understand that I'll be taking this piece and making a glass sculpture from it. In some cases, I've done. Um, the biggest one I've done is an 8 foot totem. It's about 2,800
Wow.
pounds of glass, and it's pretty massive. But it's really
Yeah.
impressive to see such a large glass sculpture in person.
Is that for installation? Was it a commission piece?
I did. So I've done three of them, which were commissioned essentially for private homes. Those were about 7.5 feet tall. They were so the idea of a totem pole is it's supposed to it traditionally it tells a story.
Hmm.
So I created this story about my great grandmother who had a bear cub as a pet when she was growing up in
Wow.
Alaska, the turn of the century. So I made this, human figure that represents my great grandmother, and then she has this hat on, and on top of the hat, this little bear cub is sort of hanging on to this hat. So it's like, so you have to
Right.
understand the context of what the sculpture represents, and then
Hmm.
give the client a story so they can tell people the story.
Do you take risk or challenges in your artistic creations,
Well, I think
or
those were
or
the
your ideas and trying to
yeah.
create something?
Yeah, I mean, the totem poles that was kind of a risk in a lot of ways. I was trying to find someone who could cast this sculpture for me, and ended up having to go to the Czech Republic because they're
Wow.
really well versed in making large scale castings, and they actually still make lead crystal there, different colored lead crystal material. So I can use their material and use their, the artists over there to help me fabricate these things. So those were kind of risky because, I mean, they take, the largest ones take about 10 weeks in the kiln,
Wow.
when you're firing, melting the glass into these
Hmm.
forms. And when they come out, you're hoping that they're still stable. I mean, it's kind of where it's kind of where art ends and science begins, in
Right.
terms of making these castings, because they have to cool in such a specific manner that, the more massive the piece of glass is, the longer it takes to cool. So those are some
Right.
of the biggest, probably some of the biggest castings that maybe have ever been made, really. But they are those are definitely a risk. We had a couple of failures in the kiln. So after 10 weeks, you open up the kiln and the piece is broken. And you're like,
Oh, wow.
back to the drawing board. But I think in terms of the sculpture that I do, that's just like an evolution of trial and error, and
Hmm.
trying to achieve certain forms to make it look like a native piece of sculpture. And Yeah, after 41 years, I've been working with glass now, so it continues to evolve and change and grow.
So in creating and glass blowing, I mean, there's such a technique to it. Has you tried to start something and then it's kind of morphed and taken a mind of its own and became something else through the
Yeah,
process?
there's definitely a lot of that. Like I say,
Yeah.
trial and error. So,
All
you're
right.
you're endeavoring to create something, and I mean that's the same with any, when you're trying to make one of a kind sculptures, then sometimes you'll, or even when you're just beginning glass blowing, you imagine this, making a vase of some sort, like a
Hmm.
functional object, and then you think it's like the most beautiful thing. You put it away in the kiln, because you only have a certain amount of time to work with it. You
Right.
put it away and you take it out the next day, and you're looking at it, and it's like, wow, that wasn't exactly what I was shooting for. But you start to so glass blowing really relies on a lot of forethought, and pre-planning, and to achieve certain kinds of forms, you really have to see what the limitations are. In some cases, I'm adding these appendages on, like I might make a
Hmm.
bird and then add these wings, these glass wings, or something like that, and it becomes kind of a process that you build on and grow with.
Right. Right. Collaboration and community are important aspects of many indigenous cultures. Have you collaborated with other artists or worked within your community?
Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time in Santa Fe, which is
Hmm.
kind of the center for contemporary Native art, really.
Hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of traditional art. It's every third weekend of August is this art fair that happens down there,
Right.
and so a lot of people come to that. It's been going on for 100 years, over 100 years now, and it's really grown in different ways. To include, like, native fashion,
Right.
film,
A
music,
wide range of areas.
sculpture, and so I've met several artists down there, some Pueblo artists that I've worked with, and of course, their vessel forms, the different
Hmm.
shapes and that they make, and sometimes, oftentimes they're ornamented with designs of their region. And so I've done some pretty high profile collaborations with several different artists. I've also traveled to Australia, New Zealand, and worked with
Wow.
Maori artists and Australian Aboriginal people, and so that is, and so in a lot of ways, that's a way of me sharing, um, or showing what can be
Right.
done with my technique or my specific approach. And so when we collaborate, we put both our names on the piece or the body of work, and then just kind of go through the motions of
Hmm.
doing this, sandblasted carving. So you have a lot of control when you can draw directly onto the glass and cut out the areas and establish the design work.
So, in your experience in collaborating, how has this impacted your art and your connection to your heritage?
Well, yeah, I mean, I did spend a fair amount of time going to these indigenous artist gatherings, and
Hmm.
in this case, we were like Maori and Hawaiian and Native North American, so we would all come together and share. And what I found was these gatherings are quite profound in so many ways because indigenous people from all around the world have a similar experience with,
Right.
the colonization and,
Hmm.
sometimes oppression. But so I learned by working with other people, how do they interpret their cultural art for today's world? In the old days, the Tlingkit work, I mean, it was really for the community, right? It was
Right.
a visual language. It was kind of an oral tradition. And when I'm working with other artists, sometimes there are things that we don't share
Right.
in an art form that we're selling to public, to collectors. And so, but so I understand. I get to hear what their motivations are and how they would like to present it and how this collaboration is going to bring a new dimension to the cultural art.
Hmm. Sometimes indigenous art bridges traditional and contemporary elements. How do you navigate the balance between honoring your cultural traditions and expressing your individual artistic vision?
Yeah, I mean, I like I mentioned about trying to interpret mythologies that are very old, and
Hmm.
these stories that we're sort of brought up with, and in some cases, like I said, I try to go more modern and more, sometimes I'll work on. So I love the process of glass blowing. So I'll just kind of make a shape that is, maybe it's like a vase form,
Right.
it's a very elegant vase form, and I'll just put, Northwest Coast design on it. And that's sort of, creating more of a decorative art object. And then sometimes, I guess like my ideas about my next steps.
Mm.
I've been um, looking at these ancient mythologies, but I'm also wondering what is Raven up to today? Like,
Right.
what's he, if the culture had not been, interrupted or, kind of truncated, it would have been it, this concept that would have been ever evolving. There would have been more stories coming out about Raven and,
Absolutely.
passed down and what have you. So
Hmm.
now I'm trying to think about Raven as kind of a spirit that surrounds us and maybe still trying to affect things. So we have these old stories of how Raven stole the sun, he stole the water from this natural spring that was being guarded by petrel, the bird petrel. And so he swallowed up that entire natural spring and he flew. But he was so engorged with water, the water was dribbling out of his mouth, and it created the rivers and the streams. So, my new idea is like maybe Raven's trying to battle climate change, or
Right.
maybe Raven is, trying to protect the missing and murdered Indigenous women. Maybe he's trying to. Maybe he discovered the residential grave school sites, or residential school grave sites,
Right.
things like that. So, I
Right.
mean, I think in a lot of ways, we can use that raven as a metaphor for continuing to teach and develop symbolisms, and especially things that pertain to uh, our community and the things that are happening today.
In what ways do you envision your art contributing to a broader understanding and appreciation of Native American culture, both within and outside the community.
Well, glass is a non-traditional medium,
Right.
obviously, but the fact is that glass as a sculptural material, I mean, average people didn't have access to glass prior to about 60 years ago. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
was basically um, a marriage of art and industry. You had the industry that, created the workspace and, was maybe making bottles and vases and functional objects.
Right.
And then you had designers that were educated in design and they would design the objects. But about 60 years ago, there was a man named Harvey Littleton um, who built a furnace. He went to Europe and he saw people working with glass, and he came back to the States and he built the furnace and he started making glass art. And so that's what we think of as the studio glass movement. And so if you go back 60 years, and I've been doing it for 41 years now, now, I mean, we have access to this material, and so it's no mystery that native people didn't have access to working with glass, but now we
Mm-hmm.
have it, and I think of it as kind of a transformation medium. I mean, glass is a very special material. It's going from a liquid to a solid, and you're shaping it, you're working with it, and I contend that the more that I work with glass, the more traditional it becomes for native culture. So
Right.
it's something that I and mostly within the community, people are excited about the material. I'm hoping that it'll continue to grow. I think back in 2003, I was involved with helping a couple of curators make an overview of glass art, an exhibition of glass art, native glass art.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, there was about 15 people involved that were either working with glass, directly, or designing glass and working with artisans that could
Mm-hmm.
help, execute the piece. And now there's a new exhibition called Clearly Indigenous, and it's traveling the country a bit. I think it's got a long itinerary. It's probably going to be on the road for about 5 years, traveling all
Wow.
around. And that show contains about 40 plus. I don't know the exact number, but there's a lot more than there was in 2003. So I feel like it's gaining some, getting a foothold
Mm-hmm.
within, the cultural arts, and so I'm really excited about that.
Amazing. 5 years. That's a long, long traveling exhibit. Are there any
Hmm.
particular artists, both within the Native American community and beyond, who have influenced your style or perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I work with, um, I mean, I've worked with the community in Alaska. They commissioned me to do some significant pieces in the home community in Juneau, Alaska. So I made this really big screen for this cultural arts center in Alaska. That was um, that was really exciting because again, it signified this acceptance of this new medium, and so I think. Oh, what was I going to say about? What was the question?
uh,
Uh,
Influences or anybody
uh,
within
oh,
the community or
yeah,
beyond? Yeah.
yeah. So when I mean, the first artist that I saw, native artist that I saw working with glass was a woman named Susan Point, who is from Vancouver area. She's a Salish artist, and she was doing sandblasting, and I was like, hey, wait a minute, this is this is I'm part of this too.
Right.
I'd like to explore this, and so I saw the techniques that she was using, and I said, oh, I can figure. I know people who do. It's nothing that's like invented. It's sandblasting is a very common technique that's used for carving stone and all kinds of things. So,
Mm-hmm.
and there was another man named Marvin Oliver who was he's passed away now, but he was a professor at the University of Washington, and he was a big he was a big mentor to me, and we I showed him my work, and he encouraged me along the way. And Joe David is another artist from Vancouver Island who
Hmm.
also part of the Northwest Coast group, as far as contemporary artists, and he's become my mentor. And he teaches me a lot about the details about the designs that I'm creating. And we've been spending about 23 years working off and on together. And so yeah, there's a lot of folks out there. All of my friends down in the Southwest, painters and sculptors alike. I mean, it's a great sort of it's a big community, and it's
Right,
really
right.
fun that we're all kind of in this. I think making a case for Native art in as a contemporary, in the modern art world.
Hmm.
Fact is that we are have never been really highlighted in that modern art movement, but I feel like that it's time now, and I think it's really starting to open up a little bit, and people are accepting native art from all different perspectives, from conceptual art.
Correct.
Nick Galanin is another. He's another fellow Tlingkit artist who's really conceptual, and I really admire his the work that he does. It's really varied, and it's he's making a lot of inroads into museums, and he's being embraced by the museum world, and so that can only help us,
Correct.
get more awareness for what we're doing.
And I've said many times on this show that just because we had art 400 years ago, we continue to evolve. It doesn't stop. What was traditional, it continues on. Even comic art, you see a lot of Native American comic books right now that's artistic in endeavors.
Right.
So we continue to grow and continue to be individuals and peoples all over in many, many ways.
Hmm.
What inspires you and motivates you?
Well, I think it's really about this being a pioneer in a lot of ways,
Hmm.
and connecting with the native community, and actually, you know, giving contributing in a new way. That's kind of exciting. Like I say, when I see younger native artists doing new things,
Right.
it's always, I mean, it's needed. What my friend Joe David brought up a really good point, saying that some of the materials that we work with are becoming increasingly rare, like big cedar logs for totem poles or dugout
Hmm.
canoes and that type of thing. And that you will start to see new medium be adopted to keep the stories and symbols alive, and going forward. And so when I see artists trying new things and forging new paths, that's exciting, and that's what I hope to help solidify for the Native community.
When you started this artistic path 40 years ago, are there any specific experiences or moments that have sparked your creative journey?
Yeah, I mean I was I found since I learned through working with other people, um, I got this job on a really great team of really experienced and highly skilled glass blowers, and
Mhm.
I was able to you know contribute, as an assistant, and help and learn and watch and observe. And so at one point, I really did feel like, okay, I need to veer off and do my own thing. And I think that every artist comes to that fork in the
Right.
road where you're like, oh, do you go left or do you go right? I mean, and so for me, had I chosen to not if I didn't place myself on this path, then I wouldn't be where I am today. And so I think there was yeah, it was just that sort of breaking away
Right.
and leaving the family, sort of my glass blowing
Growing up.
family. Yeah, growing up, and then taking the skills that I had acquired and then applying them in different ways. And so I think I think it'd be really hard to duplicate the experience that I had growing up, working with the people that I did.
Mhm.
Um, People like Benjamin Moore and Dante Marioni and Lino Tagliapietro, all these incredible glassmakers, that were that had me on their teams, that encouraged me along the way. And so I think in the end, I would have gone, probably would have gone if I could have, I would have gone the way of music. I mean, I was really trying to make it as a musician, as a rock star.
Right.
That was the box that I checked when I was trying to, figure out my career. But it's a tough way to make a living. And so now I just use my glass career to support my music habits, so
There you go. Hey,
yeah.
still got it going. So being an artist is tough enough as it is. Do you still see there's challenges for Native American artists on the global platform?
Well, I think that like I was saying, the fact is that we haven't been really given this platform naturally
Hmm.
already. I mean, it's taken several artists to really just keep pressing and pressing and trying to make a pathway for other artists um, to learn and grow and thrive. I mean, I think that the more that we work as contemporary, native artists, that it just shows an example to the next generation.
Hmm.
And I mean, it was pointed out to me by a good friend of mine who said, he just said, you don't realize it, but people are watching what you do and they're seeing your successes and they're seeing you grow as an artist, and all of your opportunities that come your way.
Hmm.
And so, he said, you're really being you're an example, even though you didn't put yourself out like that.
Right,
So,
right.
I think about that a lot, and I think about that, um, and I try to encourage young artists as much as I can, and expose them to what the possibilities are.
Hmm. And as a old saying goes, we all stand on someone's shoulders before us. So
True,
eventually someone would be standing on our shoulders.
exactly.
Is there any prominent, significant pieces that you're most proud of to date?
Well, yeah, I think that the piece that I'd mentioned that went
The
back
totem?
into the home community, that
Yeah.
this cultural arts center in Juneau, Alaska. It's called the Sea Alaska Heritage, or the Walter Soboleff Building, and so that piece, is kind of, I mean, there is a thing about the way that I create artwork, and I have to sell it through galleries, and it goes largely to non-native people. And
Mhm.
so when I had this opportunity to put this piece up in Alaska, it was an opportunity to do something for the community. And so I'm, pretty proud of that piece because it will be there for a good long time, as far as
Right.
I know. And so it really is. If I think about it, I was preparing myself for that moment. That being a practicing working artist is a challenge. And so when I had this opportunity, I took it very seriously, and I put all of my collective effort and experience into that piece. And so that was really special. And then there are other pieces too, like the big totems, of course. Those are monumental sculptures that I mean, there just won't be very many of them in the world. I
Hmm.
thought that I might be on a roll trying to produce these things, but they're quite a commitment. They have to be in a place that once you set them up, they're not going anywhere
Right.
anytime soon. So it's a Herculean task to take it apart and move it and place it somewhere else. So hopefully I still have a couple more of them, under my belt. But it's about finding the place to put them and the people
Hmm.
that the patrons who can support that this endeavor. So it's still it's still a bit of a hustle. No matter what stage you're at, you're always trying to perpetuate, your practice. And but I've got a studio, I've got employees, I've got people that I support, financially, and they help me, execute the work.
Hmm.
And so I work hard for my team, I work hard for myself, um,
You
and all of
still got to
that.
get out there and sell your goods.
Yep, it's true.
So, what's the day in the life of Preston Singletary in his studio?
Well, I show up, when I'm in town, I'm not traveling for a show or whatever, or I'm working, and I work pretty constantly. I get to the studio in the fall. I'll start to blow glass and make sculptures that I will then, stack up in my storage shelf, and then I'll
Hmm.
start to put the design work on those pieces and build shows. I typically have about 2 to 3 shows per year. Um, I have one in Seattle. I have one in Santa Fe, and then well, this year in particular, I'll be going up to Vancouver and showing in a new gallery up there, and that's going to be the Doug Reynolds Gallery, and he deals primarily with Northwest Coast art, like a lot of
Hmm.
Haida and Tlingkit style art. So it's right in um, the wheelhouse of how I operate. So I'm gonna try to take the work up there and have an exhibition. But then so I'll blow glass from the fall until the spring. In the summer, when it's hotter in Seattle, then I don't have to work so much. I can turn the furnace off and just work on the cold working or the drawing part and build, finish the pieces. So, like I said, it's a multi-stage process. You have the
Hmm.
glass blowing, and then you have the designing, and then you have the sandblasting. And if I have to make metal mounts for the pieces for display or whatever is needed, then that's other aspects of what I have to take care of.
So, is there a large catalog of ideas that you have in your head of pieces you want to create?
There are. I mean,
Yeah.
like I said, there's several new sculptures that I want to work on about these new Raven stories,
Hmm.
and I'm trying. I mean, I just turned 60, so I'm trying to project like at least just 10 years. Like, okay, the next 10 years, what
Small
am I going to
blocks.
try to?
Yeah.
Yeah, what am I going to try to accomplish? After all this, and it does involve a couple of museum shows that are going to be around the country. One's going to be up in Whistler, BC. One's going to be in the San Francisco airport. One's going to be out in Jackson, Wyoming, and that's going to be, so that's over the next 3 to 4 years.
Hmm. So, no traveling, no live gigs with your band. No.
Oh yeah, no, this year, this year is quite busy with the band. I've got there's a documentary film that's being
Really?
finished
Wow.
called Kuik, The Magic of Noise, and that is, a significant uh, counter to the visual arts that I do, and I
Hmm.
take that pretty seriously. I take it. So this documentary film has been in progress for about 10 years. And over that time, we've had various members that were, um, some of which have passed away, and but we continue on as a band. And
Hmm.
we're going to be going up to Juneau in September. There's a Native Music Festival, which is actually pretty. Pretty robust. I mean, there's a lot of national acts from Canada and the U.S. that are going to be convening there, and there's going to be about 40 bands and
Wow.
over 3 days of music, and so that's happening. And then also, my Raven show is going to be opening up in Oklahoma at the Museum of Fine Art, Oklahoma City. But there's the First Americans Museum there as
Correct. Uh-huh.
well, and they decided to bring the band out.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of like a dual purpose there.
And do you,
And so yeah,
do you have a set date for that?
that's going to be the show in Oklahoma is going to be November 11th.
Fantastic.
So
Okay.
that's happening. That's but prior to that, a few days earlier, the museum show is going to be opening up. I think it's the 8th of November, 8th or 9th. And
Hmm.
so I'll go out for the opening ceremony and then have this band performance. So yeah, it's kind of
You got the best of
uh,
both worlds.
yeah, I keep saying it's going to be, my 10-year plan. In 10 years, we're going to get discovered. We'll be like the Buena Vista Social Club. I'll be like, 70 years old out there. Like, oh man, you're still playing out there. And, you know, uh, where have we been everyone's life?
You'll be the Rolling Stones Part Two.
Yeah, right.
So when does the documentary come out? Is there a release date?
It's probably going to be in the spring.
Right.
We're putting all of the elements together, just seeing a final cut of that. And we in the late winter we recorded some soundtrack material, and so we actually have a total of four new albums that are coming out. One that was kind of under COVID, and we just haven't gotten around to releasing it yet.
Hmm.
And then we recorded our sixth album, um, that will be so two albums there, and then one soundtrack material, and then one that's going to be ambient music that alternate material that wasn't used for the soundtrack. So
Wow.
we've got four albums coming out over the next year and a half or so.
Fantastic. You got a lot going on. I'm not going to ask you
Yeah.
what's next. Doing a lot of balancing act. So where are you represented currently?
So I have the Traver Gallery in Seattle. That's been the longest, local gallery. I have a show
Hmm.
there every year. Next year it'll be in May, and then the Blue Rain Gallery in Santa Fe. I've been showing with them for about 24 years, and then the Douglas Reynolds Gallery up in Vancouver. I'll be there in October. So those are the galleries. And there's also one out in Toronto, called the Sandra Ainsley Gallery, and they are a glass gallery primarily, but they've
Hmm.
been trying to incorporate my work there too.
Fantastic. Well, Preston, is there anything else you want to share with us or closing comments? I mean, this is the time to plug away.
No, I just thank you for having me, and
Absolutely.
yeah, no, I just probably just about time to get back to work.
Or the band's going to start playing in the background. Well,
Yeah.
sir, it's been a pleasure, and thank you so much for coming on the show today. We thoroughly appreciate it.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.